Folks, we are back in the Ways and Means Committee room. It is 10:45 on May 7th. We are continuing our testimony on S-127, hearing from Polly Major from Vermont Housing Conservation Board. If you would like to join us, thank you.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm Polly Major. I'm the Director of Policy and Special Projects for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And I understand you have a lot of witnesses in front of you, so I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what you've heard from the other witnesses, but maybe just to quickly say that in funding affordable housing, as we do across the state, we see infrastructure as a cost that needs to be borne by the housing developers, and that this can be a really valuable tool in helping them do more projects and helping the dollars the state puts towards affordable housing go further, reach more communities, because it won't be covering as much of that infrastructure portion. And so there's a lot of promise here in this program. It's great following Maura, who does that big picture of the housing market and what we're dealing with. And you heard from her that need for roughly 30,000 homes in the next 5 years and the remainder of this decade. The other thing we see in that data is about half of those need to be affordable to low-income Vermonters. When we look at the housing needs assessment, it anticipates that we need 2,600 homes to meet the needs of Vermonters who are homeless today, and another 13,000 Vermonters who we anticipate seeing added to our population that will be low income in the rest of this decade. So there is a market need to add homes across the spectrum and have that naturally drive down the costs of some housing. And there's also, that's going to take some time. There's an immediate need to create housing that is affordable to our communities today. And so this program is really looking at how do we balance that market need for all housing, that immediate community, household, workforce need for affordable housing. And I don't think it's come up today what we're talking about when we talk about affordable housing. So this program now has some definitions around what is a low and moderate income household. And when we look at, so I just want to kind of share some numbers that I think that helps ground us in this conversation. So when we're talking low-income household, which is a HUD standard, the HUD standard puts that at 80% AMI. That's in the definition that you have. That's a 3-person household with a household income of about $80,000. And they can afford rent of about a little over $2,000 a month. So we're talking about home rental units that are renting for about $2,000 a month. That's what we're talking about when we say affordable. And I think to most of us, that still seems pretty high. And when we look at moderate income, the traditional definition, the definition in this bill is up to 120% AMI. Again, that's a 3-person household. It's very convenient how these numbers work out, but $121,000 a year. And that, when we're looking at a home ownership unit, that's a home that's selling for around $4,000. So this bill is asking to focus on encouraging the creation of housing for low and moderate income Vermonters. And what that's looking to do is create that $2,000 a month, or hopefully less to get at the population, rental unit, or that for sale home of up to $400,000, or hopefully less, to meet the needs of more of our population. Again, when we're looking at our population, 2/3 of Vermont renters are below 80% AMI, so really need that level of affordability. So you heard Maura talk about the Act 81 report that a number of us worked on over the summer, led by the Department of Housing and Community Development, and that the very first recommendation of that report is to have a project-based tax increment financing tool focused at infrastructure with a inclusionary element. So what it says, if you unpack the report, if you read the report, it says, have this tool and ensure that a portion of the homes financed are, and require a portion of the homes financed are affordable up to these low and moderate income levels. And there's there's a real reason why you would integrate an affordability incentive into a tax increment financing tool. And I think it's about balance. The benefit of, there's an inherent bias towards creating higher value homes and properties using a tax increment financing construction, because that increment that's going to be available is going to be higher, at larger, the higher value the home is at the end of the day, because that home's going to assess at a higher value, it's going to have higher property taxes. And so that debt capacity is highest for a higher value property. So that's going to, when a developer's putting together a project, they're going to want to take advantage of that higher capacity. And so that's going to drive them to create the highest value home the market can bear. And including some provisions that target towards low and moderate income households, that can help offset some of that inherent focus towards a higher value home. And so because we both need this tool to make affordable housing development continue to be possible around the state, and we need low and moderate income homes to reflect the community's needs, I want to point out some provisions that the HCB really supports that have been added by other committees through the process, and also make some suggestions about how this committee can continue to build on that work and target this resource. So some really helpful things that happened through the other committees in the House and the Senate was including that purpose language, and then taking it a step forward, again, that purpose language saying to encourage primary dwellings for low and moderate income Vermonters. Taking that and weaving it through the administration of the program. So including it in the agreement that the developer has with the municipality, and then including it in the VEPC review. They also added in House General those definitions about what do we mean when we mean low and moderate income, and those are the numbers I cite, up to 80%, up to 120%. There's also really great work done, as we've heard discussion today, about making sure a housing program is used to fund housing. So that's saying a threshold of 70% of the floor area must be used for housing, which is really helpful as well. And finally, the House General Committee went a step further and said, how can we further incentivize using this tool for mixed income communities? And they included a increment bonus, essentially, for mixed income communities. If a development meets that 20% threshold, 20% of those homes are affordable, then instead of 70% of the statewide education fund tax increment, it could be eligible up to 80%. I think that sort of incentive structure is helpful, and I think it needs to be built on to be a real meaningful incentive for developers. What we see a promise of this program being is to make sure that affordable housing developers continue to be invited to the table when developments are happening around the state. You heard Maura talk about the priority housing project provision in Act 250 that said there was a benefit if you include 20% affordable housing, you can bypass Act 250. That was extremely valuable in integrating affordable homes into mixed income communities. An example in Hartford right now is a master development of, I think, 240 homes. 48 of those are going to be affordable, developed by Twin Pines Housing Trust because of that PHP provision, but that is going away. And so that incentive to invite the affordable housing developer to the table to integrate those units into our new neighborhoods is not going to be there in the future. But CHIP is a way that we can ensure that there still is that incentive to include these affordable units, to invite those developers to the table. And in order to be that meaningful incentive, I just think there can be more focus around the guardrails around the program that we've been talking about. So I'm going to throw out kind of 3 suggestions that can work separately or in tandem for consideration by this committee. So the first is what was included in that report, to have a PHP-like requirement for CHIP. And this is something, full disclosure, we discussed in other committees and they did not choose to include because of the concern of the subsidy needed for those affordable units. But because we want to meet that immediate need for those 15,000 homes around the state, I'm going to continue to talk about it here. So what that would look like is, in order for a project to be eligible for CHIP, 20%, so not all the homes, but 20% of those homes have to be affordable for rental, up to 80% AMI, for home ownership up to 120%. So
Can you tell us around what that is?
yeah, so those are the numbers I mentioned earlier. So when you're putting together a neighborhood development and it's you're including rental, you need to make sure that some of the homes are renting for about $2,000 a month or less. And when you're putting together a home ownership neighborhood, you need to make sure that some of the homes can be sold for $400,000 or less. So it's still a higher bar than many can afford, but looking to create those mixed income neighborhoods that we need. And I also hear a real desire from rural communities to take advantage of this, to build out that infrastructure that we know they need to add housing. And they might be the ones who struggle most with these inclusionary provisions because they won't have the scale of project that can make these lower rents and lower sale price work, because you're not going to cross subsidize. And so I think it would be reasonable to have this inclusionary provision with a threshold saying projects of over 15 units need to meet this to be eligible. But the smaller projects and smaller communities don't need to include this, to allow those communities to still take advantage of CHIP and to really invest in their infrastructure. So that's a policy suggestion that I put on the table there. The next way you can work to incentivize mixed income communities is that enhanced increment that is in the bill right now, that if 20% of the homes are affordable, then you're eligible for 80% of the increment instead of 70%. Unfortunately, I don't think that spread is going to be enough to meaningfully incentivize affordable housing because of that appraisal challenge, because the affordable housing is going to appraise at a lower value anyway. It's going to have less increment, less debt capacity. So just a 10-point spread isn't going to outweigh that inherent disadvantage that affordable housing has. So I would encourage the committee that if you want to look at how do you incentivize affordable housing through this program, that you look at increasing the spread. And what I don't have the modeling for you right now, and I apologize, is what is that right? What is the correct spread that's going to outweigh the appraisal difference between a market rate or higher home?
And we're going to hear from some folks about like what capital stacks might look like on this in order to get our heads on that. So thanks.
And finally, I've been hearing this committee talk about capacity, whether it be BEPC's capacity or the capacity of the Ed Fund to finance these projects. And so while it is harder to think about limiting this great resource that's going to unlock housing, if you have to do that, then I would urge the committee to look at, continue to prioritize investments in affordable and mixed income housing. And that's really, it's just in that scenario when we start to have a limited resource, then it becomes most important that we're targeting those dollars to ensure that we're meeting the purpose of the bill, to ensure that we're investing in efficient infrastructure. Low and moderate income housing is often naturally denser, and so is an efficient use of infrastructure. And it's addressing the conversation we've had around, but for, yes, we do not have enough housing development happening. There is some development happening. What cannot happen without public subsidy like this or like the subsidy that comes from federal or state programs is the affordable housing development. And that's just because it's so expensive to build. So if we're looking at the homes that the market cannot build, that's the affordable to middle income space that the affordable housing agencies like VHCB work in, and where you can target the funds. And I think I'll end in that I don't think it's a good idea to target these funds exclusively to affordable homes, because I think mixed income communities is a really important policy goal. And so in looking at doing any of these, I really encourage that kind of inclusionary construct where a percentage of the homes should be affordable, but not, and it doesn't have, it could be all the homes, but it doesn't have to be all the homes, so that you can both meet that market challenge that Alex and Maura were talking about for just adding housing, while also meeting the community need for low and moderate income housing.
Thank you, Polly. One of my favorite things about Vermont is that we have very naturally mixed income communities, and have historically, even on the same road, you could have an incredibly wide range of folks and houses and all of that. I think it's one of the things that makes us as strong as we are. And I think with government, like as we're doing more and more government intervention into housing, it's important that we maintain that. So thanks for highlighting that. Yes, no, we're going to do question. You just, that was your last sentence, right? Did I?
About 7 minutes.
I just, so I'm asking you.
Yes.
I thought you were concluding. Okay, great. I just didn't want to be jumping in too fast. So Representative Odie, yes, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, so I'm thinking when you say what the affordability has to be for the different, for rental and for that, the price of the home, are you thinking of any requirements, like, you know what the size of families are that are going to live in these? Because it might be cheaper to build 1 bathroom and 2 bedrooms, but the need is for 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. So would you require any particular thing happening inside the walls?
So the way that we've designed housing programs, both at the state and federal level, to accommodate different household sizes is tying it to affordable to different area median incomes. And then you unpack that HUD definition, that HUD math, and the AMI level is different for a 1-person household, 2-person, 3-person. I use 3-person because that's we're looking, that could accommodate 2 working people and a child. It could also, and this is the case of a lot of lower income families, could be 1 single working parent and 2 children. So it is adaptable to the household size and the bedroom number as well. So it's quite a complex, there's a lot behind the AMI threshold formula. And so if we tie the policy to the formula, then the policy is sizing to the needs of the household size. And then we're also looking at developers, whether they be affordable housing developers or market rate developers, are always looking at what's the need in the market. Do we need 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 2 bath houses?
Thank you. Any?
Well, we've had discussions in our committee whether tax credit programs are more efficient or less efficient than grant programs, but you happen to be in the seat of having grant programs as well. So I'm wondering at VHCB, how you decide, how it's decided between grants you're making for housing versus conservation, because you wear a couple of hats, and if that's changed over the last couple of years in terms of what the priorities are, what percentage of the grant monies have changed.
Sure. So VHCB's statute asks us to balance needs of housing and conservation. It also says that if we go over 70% to either housing or conservation, we have to come back and report to you. In recent years, we have been roughly 50-50 or 60-40 in terms of 60 housing, 40 conservation. We also receive one-time appropriations for specifically to respond to the housing crisis. And that has been the bulk of the money we've been putting forward into housing in recent years. So it's just the trust fund dollars that receive that balanced approach, and the full total appropriations we receive, whether it be federal funds we administer or one-time dollars from the state, those get targeted towards housing or towards conservation based on the appropriations language or the program. Moving forward, one thing this committee worked on last year and the legislature passed was an increase in the property transfer tax rate for second homes. And that happened in a conversation about how do we direct more resources towards housing. So that's coming into VHCB, into the trust fund VHCB administers around $6 million a year. Our understanding of the conversation is the intent of those dollars is to go towards housing. And so that is increasing the split. So we're putting closer to 2/3. This coming year, we're looking at closer to 2/3 going towards housing.
It's very helpful. I mean, because in this conversation, it seems like we're not doing anything on the grant side, and yet we are.
I have something of a technical question. One of our previous witnesses, and I think it was Betsy, but I could actually be wrong because it is blending a bit. Talked about the challenge of sort of accountability for maintaining affordable units. And I know that's something that you all do always. And so I was just wondering if you could sort of like describe how a covenant works and what it might look like for a municipality to be doing something like that, or how you would maintain affordability.
Sure. So
Accountability of affordability, I guess, is the question.
I think we're going to think about a spectrum of how we can do accountability. VHCB, we're required by statute to invest in permanent affordability. We think that's an important policy choice because it's preventing displacement and it's maintaining those mixed income communities. It comes with a compliance, a weight of compliance. And so we have stewardship. We have a stewardship director. She works with all of the developers we work with to verify compliance with the rental levels and the incomes of tenants. And that is her job. So that is a high level of accountability. When we look at the priority housing provision that was in Act 250, that is looking at a slightly lower level of compliance, slightly easier compliance. It's not looking at verifying income. It's looking at verifying the rental price or the sale price of the home. And I think as this committee is looking at, do we include some level of compliance? It is easier if the compliance is on the rental price or the sale price rather than verifying household income. The way to get at that might be to refer back to the definitions for priority housing projects, because they're linking to that sale price and rental price rather than income. The definitions in here now might be linking to income, so there could be some work to do there if you choose to move in that direction.
Thank you.
I think there's also a efficiency that could be achieved by looking at the affordable homes that are touched by any other public dollars and say, okay, those are compliance is being done by a different agency for those. And so it's really where it's affordable homes are being developed with 100% market financing. That smaller basket of homes, those are hard to do. So it's going to be a smaller basket that would need independent compliance from Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Next up, we have AARP and Smart Growth Vermont, Smart Growth America. And Saoirse, can we have that second chair returned? Yes. Do you need the second chair? No, we have two people on Zoom now. Sorry, I was thinking of yesterday. Great, perfect. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. You all have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And good morning. I'm Kelly Stoddard-Poor with AARP Vermont, and I'm going to provide a brief introduction and context setting for this work that we have engaged Smart Growth America on regarding the capital stacks. So I serve as the Associate State Director for AARP Vermont, and I lead our livable community work on behalf of the organization. Our goal is to support Vermont communities so that they are age-friendly, livable communities that allow older adults to be able to thrive, remain independent in their community, and age in place of their choice. Our livable community work, I focus on housing, transportation, public spaces, and community support services, which at ARP, we believe come together to support and facilitate independence and foster intergenerational connections. We know that the vast majority of older Vermonters want to be able to age in place. They want to stay in their community. But when we look around our communities, they have not necessarily been designed to support aging in place. We have a transportation system that relies heavily on driving vehicles. If we have to hang up the keys to our car, it often impacts our independence incredibly. We have an incredibly aging housing stock in Vermont that is built for able-bodied 35-year-olds. We have very few options for older adults to be able to downsize and stay in their community. In response to ARP's statewide Vital Voices survey that we ran in both 2019 and 2022 in Vermont, this surveyed 45 plus across the state. And we saw a significant increase from 2019 to 2022 of concern around how people were going to be able to get around in their community as they aged when their housing is not close to services or there is no options to be able to downsize and move closer into a village or downtown center. We also saw a significant increase in the desire for more housing, gentle infill in our villages and our downtown centers. ARP has been working for the last 5 to 7 years on policy and zoning reform to be able to encourage more housing in our downtowns and village centers, because we know that this is what older Vermonters need. As a national nonprofit, our mission is to improve the quality of life for all as we age, and we have the benefit of being able to work with other leaders across the country like Smart Growth America. ARP has a national program that's called Livable Communities Technical Assistance Program. And this is the program that in Vermont I've been able to take advantage of and be able to work with Smart Growth America to be able to provide research and expertise on issues such as CHIP. ARP is supportive of CHIP because of the social benefit of more housing for older adults. Through this technical assistance program, I've been able to have this opportunity to work with Michael Rodriguez and Catherine Burgess, who you'll hear from shortly afterwards, to provide additional capacity to our work to help guide our policies so that we can support livable communities in Vermont. And I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, and she can begin to tee up the capital stacks analysis that they were able to do on behalf of ARP.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. I'll look to Kelly even though she can't see us here. My name's Catherine Burgess, and I lead the land use and development team at Smart Growth America. And we're a national nonprofit based in DC, but with some remote and national staff. And I live right here in Montpelier. So it's very exciting to be able to walk to the State House and come here today and to participate in this testimony. As Kelly shared, we had the opportunity to work with ARP Vermont on a study of CHIP, really looking at the project scale. And having been here this morning, I'm very excited to have that opportunity to really zoom in and look at the types of projects that could be enabled and could move forward through CHIP. So as I mentioned, just to share a bit of background on Smart Growth America, we're a national nonprofit, and our North Star is a country where no matter who you are or where you live, you can enjoy living in a place that's healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And a big focus for us is better connecting housing, transportation resources, economic development. And what we find is that so many of the planning and development strategies that help people to age in place and to children, they're beneficial for households with different sizes and budgets and needs. So we're really thrilled to support ARP here. Can we go to the next slide, Michael? To quickly share just some of our other work in the state that's informed this study. We were part of the team on the designations reform study last year, which then informed the direction of Act 181. We also did a project last year with ARP Vermont around reclassifying state highways. So really looking at the context, especially in smaller communities. And then finally, to complement this capital stack study, we did a state-by-state assessment of different approaches to TIF, and found that in New England, Vermont has the least emphasis on housing in TIF. So next slide. I think having been here this morning, we can actually skip these slides on the housing access crisis. I'm very inspired to see the resolve here to address the issue. I will say from a national nonprofit perspective, we're seeing this issue happening nationally, but I think we see the crisis as especially acute here. Let's go to, yeah, here we go. Thanks, Michael. Oh, can you go back actually? Yeah, we see the housing access challenges especially difficult in Vermont in comparison to other places where we work because costs are higher, the workforce issues are more challenging, seasonal issues, you all are very familiar with these. And I love working here given the opportunity to impact local policy, but we both love seeing all the best practice and innovation here that we can share with other states, but we also recognize in some ways you have to go further than other states because it's a more difficult environment right now in which to build. So with that, I'm going to pass this to Michael to talk through what we were teed up to do through this partnership with the ARP to really look at how CHIP could impact the development at the site scale, which we think is very appropriate given this is a program designed for the site level rather than the district level. And we're really excited for the potential for more housing to be enabled in these high quality, well-connected locations. And for this housing to, be able to accommodate older adults and households with different needs, especially affordable housing, accessibility, and smaller and non-traditional types of units. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Michael to walk through what the study looked like.
Yeah, so to introduce myself,
Yeah, thank you.
so I'm Dr. Michael Rodriguez. I am Director of Research here at Smart Growth America. And my background, I'm at the intersection of urban planning, economics, and infrastructure. It's sort of what I really focus on in a lot. And my PhD is in public policy and economics. I've worked with a lot of developers at CBRE. I led the Mid-Atlantic Research team here and can see their perspective, and that's what I wanted to bring here. So with this exercise, I wanted to really accomplish two things. Number one, what might this type of policy, if we analyze it quickly, do for individual projects? And then number two is this public policy question that when I'm with the policy students, I teach at GW and George Washington University and at Virginia Tech. We focus on, is this a wise policy and why? Then we're thinking about level and impact. That's a little bit harder question, but I hope that this sort of gets us there. So for one, we start out with this slide. Working with developers, this might shock a lot of typical citizens and residents that are just thinking about, well, developers are making a lot of money. Why do they need any sort of program anyways? It's kind of a person on the street thinking. And just the fact is, when you're talking about housing development, these are investors who are looking at a rate of return of about 12 to 18% for their project at the developer level. And the reason that is because the opportunity cost of capital. If you wanted to get 7%, well, why waste your time doing this whole headache and risk when you could have just invested, well, typically in the stock market or bonds or whatever your next best thing is. In the current environment, if we're looking at the bond market and all the kind of craziness that's happening there, this is making the cost of capital even higher because what's happening with bonds is you can start being your next best bet, which is treasuries, are giving you a different amount of money than they used to be. So that's actually making it harder for other projects to be able to pencil, in other words. So we're looking at an environment where a deal needs about 13 to 15% rate of return. Typically, varies by project, varies by developer appetite, but that's a kind of ballpark to get there, to be able to pencil, to be worthwhile. So what we did is we looked at two sample projects and we talked to various Vermont-based developers. This one is a sample kind of synthetic project without providing a developer's individualized information. And then the second one is an actual example of a small scale developer and what happens. So let me walk you through here what happens. We have 60 units. Call this project a 60-unit project. 75 market, 25% affordable. We're looking at a pretty typical, maybe even a little bit affordable Vermont rent, 1100 to 200. Based off of cost structures, this type of development would be at about 416K a unit in terms of cost. Remember, land value is very high in Vermont. That's probably one of the biggest costs, but construction costs, labor costs are ticking up and up, as we know. So you're trying to target to get to that level. You want a net operating income of about 1.5 million annually. That's one of the kind of assumptions that goes into this. So this gets a little complicated, but basically a sample capital stack would be something like 9.5 million in equity. And this is coming from about maybe a 50% loan, maybe 12% in terms of LIHTC funding for that affordable. With CHIP, this program actually is able to get maybe upwards of 2 million in funding for CHIP. That reduces the equity cost, and that's going to change your net operating income. It's going to, excuse me, your rate of return at the end, as I'll show you. So a comparison of what this looks like for this type of a project. Basically, CHIP comes in for this type of a project, as we estimated, about 8% of the project, and that's coming out mostly out of developer equity. So the developer's putting in a little bit less equity. LIHTC comes in at a different kind of a rate, and then you're getting this CHIP filling in sort of the rest. So your estimated return on investment, then, we're trying to get 12 to 13%. And the improved return can meet this investment hurdle. So if we're starting about 10%, maybe where we are, this 8%, it doesn't, pardon?
Oh, no, someone was just coughing. I promise I will interrupt you loudly when we need to, but we're actually going to hold all questions until you're done, so you don't even have to worry.
Okay, so this 10%, about where you sort of are, boosts up to about 12 to 13%. The way the math works is that 8% that you're giving them, it doesn't mean your return on investment becomes 8%. It's a little bit more of a complicated formula, but it works out that more or less the 8% for this one project translates to maybe a 4 percentage point bump. About a 2 to 3 percentage point bump to your return on investment. That's how that kind of works out. That can be the difference of a project being viable, of happening or not. That second part that I talked about, is it wise public policy? And there was a lot of discussion today, which I was glad to hear, about the but-for test. Is this going to happen? That make or break point can be the difference of a project happening. So the second example, small scale. So we talked about a 60-unit project. We're going to focus in on a 4-unit project. So this is actually a project that did happen in Vermont. And in this project, we had about a $1.3 million project, so much smaller. And a different example of the affordability and the market rate going on here. Very small 4-unit development, but I want to give a range because a lot of you are from smaller communities, rural areas, where this might actually be a pretty large amount of the uptake of your policy. So there's a very different gap at small scale. The risk is actually a little bit different here. And so your capital sources might involve state grants and equity and different types of private loans. And that's what happened with this type of project. In this case, CHIP comes in and offsets, again, the infrastructure funding, as you know. So what this looks like, visualize a little bit. So in this case, we have this sort of CHIP coming in and it's filling about 20% of that gap. So mainly focus on the yellow, about 20% now. That's coming out of a lot of the other kind of capital stacks. So of the capital. So think about this. It's basically 20%. It can come from anywhere. It's coming in from mostly the developer. And so CHIP reduces this upfront equity burden by about 250K. And it's going to lower the debt service requirements. It's a smaller loan. In this case, it strengthens the developer return on investment by about 4 to 6 percentage points. So you're giving them basically 20% chunk in the capital stack for this small scale project. And that could be the difference of 4 to 6 percentage points. So that translation, think of this program this way. It's gonna be an incentive program that's based off of a TIF style structure. And that whatever quantity that incentive is to the project, that's going to change by project. 8%, 20%, maybe a different project's 10%, maybe it's higher than 20% for another project, whatever it is. That's going to be some positive boost to return on investment. 2 percentage points, 4, 6 percentage points, whatever it is. That difference, that delta, again, as you talked about earlier today that I was listening to, all those units that were not built, think of all the units over the past 5, 10 years, 20 years even, that have not been built in Vermont. How many of those could have been on the razor's edge of this 2 to 3 percentage point bump would have made the difference. Now that's harder to estimate. We didn't do that exercise, but it's to think about that that's some substantial number of units that would have been built. So what CHIP unlocks is deeper affordability. It unlocks the ability of ADA and accessibility features because you think of it, if the money's not being used for the infrastructure, there's a lot of other things you could do with it. You could enhance your project. You could boost affordability levels. So your target rents might actually be able to come down. These are all different things you could do. You could have that energy efficiency, especially with the larger scale projects. This doesn't mean that these things wouldn't happen at small scales. It's just that they're more viable at the larger scale type of projects, especially this type of public realm. You're going to see that with the larger projects. So to recap a little bit of your estimated ROI with and without CHIP, you see 10 to 13%. You see 8-ish% become almost 13-ish%, 12-ish%. That gap between the blues going from left to right, that little gap, that's the difference of units being built or not. At the lower level, it's very possible that the project just may not have penciled. Sometimes it did. In the case of the small scale, this was a project that actually did complete without CHIP. But I wanted to show you the difference of the ROI on a project with it. And there's a lot of good smart growth outcomes that happen. We focus on reduced vehicle miles traveled and all these other good things that you see on this. I don't need to read the slide to you, but there's a lot of good smart growth outcomes when we're able to do that. A small plug is that we worked on your state designation programs. And if this program is going to be rationed in any ways or otherwise tested, it might be wise to think about prioritizing areas where this type of return in other areas, smart growth type of a thing, would be leveraged, in other words. And a lot of the discussion we did the other year about the incentive program was that the designation program is that a good designation program layers on a lot of incentives to those designations. So it might be an opportunity to think about. And so this is really a repeat, most of what we just said, but also your sales tax base going up. And you've heard a lot about these type of issues throughout the discussion today, so I don't want to belabor that. So with that being done, I'll take, Catherine and I are happy to take your questions.
The stack was incredibly helpful to have. Thank you. I have a big picture question, which is that property taxes also affect the cost of housing and sustaining housing. I think we all know that. And I think particularly in the case of AARP, older Vermonters are certainly, with fixed incomes, are certainly some of the most concerned about their property taxes of folks around the state. And so sort of balancing, I guess it's more a question for Kelly than anyone else, but like balancing your constituency's interest in this. I also know there are a lot of Vermonters in older Vermonters in 4-bedroom houses with high property taxes that don't actually want to be living in those 4-bedroom houses with high property taxes and would rather move somewhere smaller if we had smart growth. So I might have just teed up your answer. I don't know, Kelly.
You certainly did. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that is certainly something that we hear over and over from our members and broadly the 45 plus when we survey. We actually have a more recent survey out in the field right now, which will have those results shortly. But yeah, there is a great desire to be able to downsize, but particularly to be able to stay in your community, right? Because that's where you have the deep connections to your family, your friends, your neighborhood. And so being able to have more housing in our downtown and village centers in walkable locations that are connected to community support services, that is going to enrich older Vermonters' lives. And so that is that we see a growing increase for that and a growing increase for supporting of zoning reform and having that type of housing in our downtowns and village centers. So that is certainly increasing. And if we're able to increase the number of housing across the state, we're able to also help build that grand list as well. So that is an important piece from our perspective.
Thank you. And thank you very much to all three of you for your patience and how I shuffled you around the agenda. So really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't see anyone else's questions. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Representative Feltus.
I did have one.
No.
In the various capital stacks that Dr. Rodriguez showed to us, you put the chip in there. Were you assuming a 70% retention rate in those numbers? Because I've sometimes thought
so-
we reduce that or increase
Yeah,
it.
so
or
this was the program as we've been seeing it proposed. So assuming sort of that, and now that segues to a really good point that I wanted to make. I talked about number one, is there an impact? I think it's rather unambiguous. There would be an impact. ROIs go up. It's just math, right? You give an incentive, ROIs are going to go up. The second one is this wise policy? This is the nuance of public policy where we, as legislatures, you know this, and for public policy students to understand, always level directionality and magnitude. So you have directionality in terms of you have an incentive program. The nuance then is level, 70%, 50%. The other way, 70-30, 30-70. I can't give a guarantee or really we weren't analyzing the differences of level of the precise magnitude, but I would offer exploring that further is a wise thing to understand, whether 70% is the level you want, whether 50% is the level. And number two, having a policy that is flexible enough to adapt to market conditions and adapt to policy analysis as you see it happen in real time. Because if 70% gets this a lot of uptake and you start getting a sense that maybe you're getting a little bit beyond the but-for test and you might be getting more projects that might have otherwise just happened, that can be scaled back. So the job as wise legislatures as you are is to then be able to be nimble enough to get that level portion and start honing that in and get that right. So 70% is the assumption, and that can always be changed. And that's worthy of further analysis.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was concerned about that.
Representative Maslin, last word.
Thank you very much, both of you. You just mentioned, Michael, I should look at the camera, I guess, instead of the screen. Flexibility for changing markets. You understand, once we put something in statute, it seems to take forever for us to change it if we need to. So any guidance that you can offer either now or later that may head us in the right direction with regards to including flexibility in what we do so that we don't get stuck with something that's too muddy. Thank you.
I would say from the simplest way of doing something, a sunset provision where you might have this for a few years subject to renewal on another session. Then you can come back upon renewal and calibrate it. Much like you might even just your state income tax levels or whatever other policy that has a level eventually gets renewed. But this one might be try a couple years at one level, then we come back, reassess it. A more complex version of it would be to have different types of stabilizers and triggers into the program that in a further analysis, you might scale this to things like the the level of housing growth that you have. As it kind of comes up, you might start phasing it out a little bit. It can also be subject to market conditions like bond markets and bond yields. Otherwise, your opportunity cost, your prevailing interest rates is another index level. So if interest rates start coming down, you don't need as much of an incentive. That's another thing to consider. Or all of these things are just something to consider in 2 years, 3 years, whatever you call it. I think that's probably the way we might see public policy done with that type of way. So you have your typical sunset, come on and renew it, or you could have internal movement baked into the legislation that then your administrators have to then administer to calculate the new level every year, or whatever that is.
Thank you. That is very helpful and really appreciate all of your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Dominic, I did not realize you were thanks for joining us. Thanks for helping me. We are. And I think I've only seen you inside a computer before.
Yeah, I'm bigger in person.
Yes. Thanks for joining us. And folks, we have, the LCT has kindly agreed to move to after the floor. And so we have about 10 minutes with you, and then we're going to hear from the auditor, and then we'll break for lunch.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Actually, it was great to hear other folks' testimony. My name is Dominic Cloud. I'm the city manager in St. Albans, Vermont. I think I can offer a practitioner's perspective, speak to some of the questions that have been raised, and try to do it in 5 minutes.
Ideal. Thanks.
TIF is the closest thing to a silver bullet that you have for addressing the housing problem. And its successor program, CHIP, is even better. When we talk about the various players for economic development, Vermont cities and towns are really well positioned to move this ball forward. For a handful of reasons. I describe these as offensive strategies. Number one, we can borrow cheaper than anybody else. And in a high rate environment,
We meaning municipalities?
municipalities, we can borrow at 3% or less, and the cost of private developer 7%. We have great access to capital. When we're evaluating a project, we don't need a 16% return within 7 years. We don't have to beat the market. We just need our money back so we can do it again. So we can measure returns qualitatively and quantitatively over a longer time horizon. And we have to consider the erosional cost of doing nothing, in addition to the transactional cost of doing something. When I look around the state, I see communities all up and down the state that are grappling with how do we deal with a tax base that is insufficient to provide the services my citizens want. We have seen this committee as well, versed with. Pass these around if I can. St. Albans, start with the bad looking one. St. Albans in roughly 2012. That's not exactly,
The bad looking on the parking lot one?
yeah.
Some people like parking lots. I'm just teasing. Go on.
That doesn't look like the center of business and commerce in Franklin County. That's not a place that you can attract development to. Our native sons, like Representative Kimball, left and moved to Woodstock.
Well done.
That's what a community in decline looks like. Now turn it over. That's 4 years. And to Representative, earlier question about why TIF and why CHIP. That's why. It is the most transformational, the most powerful silver bullet. I'm going to show you 3 examples. This is the first. Now, we spent $14 million on that project at a time when our general fund budget was 10. There's the but for that we keep alluding to. And we bought all the land and we built the structured parking and we dealt with all the environmental issues. And then we turned to a developer, we were able to convince them to build an office building on one side and a hotel that we were able to convince to come into town on the other side. And now it's worth 40 million. 40 million. So the question about why TIF and why CHIP, it is the most efficient and the most effective. It drives down costs by 30%. That's what the capital stack conversation was showing you. But here's the next one we did. All the relevant. Here's your staple. The top picture is the view outside of my office. And after we did the first project that I just showed you, I was ready to turtle up a bit, you know. The greatest risk in politics is overreaching. But our citizens had got addicted to growth. And they wouldn't let us get away with that. So this is the Congress in Maine project. It's 4 or 5 different lots. It's completely, should be enough of a chair.
I've been there in real life with my eyes wide open. Representative McCarthy went very far out his way to make sure I understood what a good tip looked like.
So that's pre, flip it over. That's now. This is a 20,000 square foot office building anchoring the lot. On the back of the lot is 60 units of mixed use housing, 30 affordable, 30 workforce to market rate. We spent $2.5 million in TIF financing. And that project is now worth $10 million. Let me show you one more. Going to wrap up.
We used to deliver newspapers.
Oh, yeah? Looks different now, huh?
Oh, my goodness. Do people deliver newspapers in Woodstock or is everyone just?
It's too small.
We're not gonna make good stuff.
This is the Fonda Paper Company. You know those little red Solo cups that we all used to use in college, right? Turns out they were full of TCEs and PCBs, and they were made in St. Albans, and from time to time, somebody spilled a little ink. So that's 120,000 square foot manufacturing space on a 5-acre lot. Flip it over, it cost us $5 million to prepare that lot, that 5-acre lot for development. So it's $1 million an acre. Now, starting in July, new development that you'll see there, break ground. And so that will be 120,000 units of mixed income apartments. 85 market rate, 35 senior.
It's at 120, right?
Yeah, what's the math? 20, so the old building was 120,000 square feet. Now we're doing 100, you know, there's. That's how you drive down costs. That's how it gets done. That's why TIF is the most efficient and the most effective. Now, there's a national narrative that says TIF is unnecessary. The Ed Fund is agnostic. Doesn't care where the development happens. All you're doing is attracting it to St. Albans. That doesn't align with my experience. These were not projects that were floating around looking for someplace to be done in Vermont. This was economic gardening. This was literally growing them from the ground up. Me talking with projects on the ground and saying, what if we built the parking? Could you build the building next door? What if we handled all the land acquisition and the lot assembly and the permitting and the environmental remediation and brought you a project that was ready to go? Could you do it? And then they say yes, because of what you just saw in the previous set of slides. So I'd like to wrap up by making two final points that don't come up a lot in this discussion. First is that this is Vermont. It matters where, and it matters how development occurs. Vermonters have a tenuous relationship with development. At best, it's often a necessary evil. And CHIP and TIF allow us to deliver the projects that Vermonters like to see. And when we're talking in some of these rural communities about closing schools, we don't have enough students in them. This allows the community to come forward and say, here's a way to grow our tax base and reinvigorate our schools, stabilize our workforce with workers. It is the closest thing to a silver bullet. Finally, on the subject of appeals. It's one thing to oppose a development project, even one with a mission-driven nonprofit developer. It's something else entirely to oppose a community-driven development project that has been approved by the voters. St. Albans has had townwide votes for 5 major TIF projects. This is a dense urban area. There's neighbors all around us. All of them have appeal rights. Any one of them could have stopped the project. We're on track to hit 275 units of housing just by what's in the hopper. All of the votes have passed by at least 2-1. And we've never gotten one appeal. And it's because of the process. The process matters. That's us in a nutshell. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we can do one question and then folks can follow up via email if they need to, but you were so comprehensive.
I have
Okay,
one question.
yeah.
So, Dominic, thank you. I think one of the differences is that in that case, the city is the developer in many cases, is really in on it.
Yeah.
And CHIP is anticipating that developer may not be the municipality.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in how you've approached projects yourself and how other municipalities might be able to handle that?
CHIP is envisioning it that they may not. I suspect that when they're gonna, the borrowing costs are significant, you know, you knock 3 percentage points off in this environment, you know, so I'm a big advocate for the towns. And you can do this without having a lot of local capacity. And I think that's part of why they're trying to create that pathway. I will say I didn't know anything about commercial real estate development when I started this. And municipalities are the consummate generalists. I know enough now about real estate development as I know about designing a wastewater treatment plant or investing in the city's pension funds. So you're not supposed to play every instrument. You're just supposed to be the conductor of the symphony. All right. So I think it absolutely works, but when you leave the town out of it, you're giving money on the table.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. And folks, I made a special exception on the handouts, but I don't want like rumors flying around the building that we. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Doug. I really appreciate it. And folks, I already, the auditor note, I'm gonna have to step out in a moment. But Representative Canfield's gonna chair as I step out. So I want to make sure you have enough time. Sorry to put you at the end here.
Well, you guys are probably pretty beat after a whole day of this, but I'll try to be as I can. There's only a few big ticket issues I want to present. One is the purpose statement of the bill. It's as broad and vague as I've ever seen. It sounds great. We want to create primary residences for low and moderate income Vermonters. That sounds good. Interestingly, there's nothing in this bill to follow up on that requires anything about the permanency of primary residences or affordable housing without just housing, but it says low and mod. But there's no obligation for a developer to do anything, which is curious to me. So I think if I were in your seats, I would want to put some meat on the bone in the purpose statement and then follow up with some changes in the body of the bill on the program to require that. And there are some ways to do that. One is, as Burlington has done for now 35 years, something called inclusionary zoning, where if a project with more than 10 units, I think it's 10, is developed, 15% have to be affordable. Now, affordable can be whatever you tell them it has to be. Obviously, if it's very low, it's extremely expensive. So for this project, you probably don't want to go that. VHCP has a lot of partners and they do what they can. But if you were to go to 100 or 120 of area median income, then you probably get some good work for the middle class. And I know people talk about that, but there's nothing in this bill about that, nothing at all. So that's one option. The other is that there's no accountability here because there's no quantifiable goals. If you just say we want to help low and mod people, how can VEPC report at any point in this forward-looking world about the success of this program if they don't know what to measure? Low mod, primary residences, for how long? Would the low mod stuff be affordable at what level and in perpetuity or not? And if units, as you well know, are not made, if affordable units are not made affordable in perpetuity, then your family, after you buy it, then 10 years later, you get some kids, you built up a little equity, you want to take your equity with you. But what the nonprofit developers like the Champlain Housing Trust, the old Burlington Land Trust do is say, there's permanency here. You can take some of your equity, not all, so that the next buyer will also be able to live in that house. So there's those kinds of things. And the housing people know all that stuff. That's not for me. But I think it's very important that VEPC collect the data on all of this stuff and report it. And not just 5 or 10 years out, which is what the original bill said. I think even when it came to Commerce, it said that. But as soon as possible. And it doesn't have to be when occupancy permits are issued. Developers will be going to talk to communities and try to get projects in process. They will know, those communities will know, and VEPC should know what's on the table. And they can.
Do you have the capacity to send us tangible suggestions for a stronger, clearer purpose statement and for what reporting might look like? That would, especially the reporting, that would be very helpful.
Happy to, yeah. Because it's missing. The stuff they're reporting is only the core TIF stuff that we look at in the audits we do of the traditional TIF districts. How has the increment been used? Is there enough to meet the debt service? All the usual stuff, which is important, but has nothing to do with the performance of the program. And that to me is a missing link in a lot of the work that comes out of this building and has for decades. You guys often do good work. But then that didn't come out right. That didn't come out right. But then somebody else says, there's 6 more things you have to do. So whatever you did last year is in process and you don't often have the time to go back and look at how successful it's been or not. And I think, there's some folks in the building now and the last few years who cared about accountability, and there's a new committee to be created. I think it's likely to pass. Who knows? But you should build it into every program that's new, that doesn't have any history, especially one where, in this case, you don't even know what it's going to cost, the Ed Fund. None. There's no limit on that, which is another point I'd like to make. It seems to me that the hit on the Ed Fund could be significant. And I would argue that you guys are obligated to say, you know, we should be tuned into that in a very specific way and ask VEPSI and the tax department, if necessary, to report every year, not 5 years out or 10 years out, but every year, how much has been obligated from the ed fund. And when you get to a penny or 2 cents on the rate, say, okay, we're going to pause. We're going to bring it back to the committees of jurisdiction. We're going to ask ourselves, is this meeting our goals? Whatever goals we end up putting in the purpose statement. And if it is, then you say, great, we can do more of this if we're comfortable with more money coming out of the ed fund. If you're not, or if it's not performing as you had hoped, then you can revise it. Or if it really stinks, you can kill it. But the point is, you guys should have that opportunity and not wait 5 or 10 years for that. I would argue you should do it as soon as possible. And I would imagine you'd be getting data within a year or two.
Representative Odie.
Thank you. I need to go back. How do you measure the hit to the ed fund? Because the way I'm looking at it, I think it's different from the way you're looking at it. Maybe therein lies the.
It's the money not sent to the ed fund that would have been had there not been a TIP. The city gets to town, the host municipality, for regular TIP and for this, gets to retain 70, I think 70 is what Commerce sent you, but it's typically 75 or 80% of all the money that would have gone to the ed fund. They keep it to pay down the debt they incurred to do the infrastructure.
That's what I'm thinking.
So it's lost revenue to the ed fund, and it's not insignificant.
I'm trying to see if it's more than that. You know, ed fund retains the original taxable value. And then,
All the increments.
part of the 30%, let's say, would be. And then 70%,
Supposed to pay the debt.
goes to pay the debt.
So it doesn't go to
I'm
the ed.
just, right, I get that. But, so that's where you get to the but-for test, right?
No, the but-for is a related but separate issue. But-for in existing TIF is determined by nothing more than a memo from Jeff Carr's crew, and they're very capable people, but they don't go to the voters. There's no evidence that anybody ever asked the voters of your town, you know, would you be willing to support the town's GO bond for 10, 20 million dollars? They don't do that.
So, all right, so this is what I was thinking during the last testimony. If the voters were to say no, then it would be but-for. Are you arguing? And then the second thing I want to ask is, let's just say that this is going well. People are building. So I have 2 questions. First one, you're the thing. The second one is, let's say the developers are building. And then state says, you know, we're feeling that we would like to do this a little differently right now. We're gonna let this play out, but in the meantime, we are going to put $100 million in grant money in front of developers, new developers. There's nothing that prevents the state from offering the grant money, and according to the testimony that we've heard so far, the developers might prefer grant money, might be easier. So nothing prevents the state from
Well, the grant
doing
money,
something differently, or a city from doing something.
there is in fact a sustainable infrastructure fund in this bill from the Muni Bond Bank. And there is $9 million in the budget for that new program. And it is intended to become a revolving loan fund, which is exactly what I think should be done rather than TIP, because that will take the ed fund completely out of the picture. But to answer your question, first of all, I'm not sure that developers need, all of a sudden, your question suggests that we all believe now that developers need deep subsidies to build housing. And I don't know that that's true. What this program purports to be about is infrastructure, municipal infrastructure. Although if you look at the definition section on improvements, there are some things in there that look to me to be, that should be a cost to the developer, not to the municipality. But that aside,
Then you look at that stack, and then what if the developer says it's just easier for me to just buy stocks and bonds?
Right.
I mean, on the slides we saw a couple of people ago.
well, they're going to come in here and tell you that the sky is falling. But in a few years, presumably, hopefully, interest rates will decline. Some of the madness about the supply chains will improve, I hope. But I don't know that this is a permanent barrier for experienced, smart developers. Is it a moment in time? Yeah. Do we have an unmet need? Yeah. Is this the best way to do it? I'm not so sure. But if you're going to do it, if this bill is going to move forward, some of the things I've said I think are essential. My job is to be the state's accountability officer. And there is no accountability in this bill. None. And there's no clear message as to what your goal is. Just housing. Housing, it's dust. It's fairy dust. So, if you want to do this, I urge you strongly, as I said, to do something with the purpose statement. Follow that up with some changes in the body of the bill, of the program, to ensure that somebody's obligated to do something that represents a public good that you all want. And as for the Ed Fund, I would argue that it makes perfect sense to collect as much data as you can early on. And then at some point, a couple of years out, you can have a conversation about how's this going? Have conditions changed? Have they not? So forth.
But,
Go, all right.
Representative Hogan.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about who the right entity is to approve project-based TIF? I know that there's right with Betsy with recourse to the Community and Housing Infrastructure Board. What's the right place to make that decision and who should be involved at the table in that decision?
That's a very good question. I was unaware of Commerce's introduction of that concept of the board. It is not truly independent because it can only meet when BEPSI asks them to meet and so forth. They're really an adjunct to BEPSI. And I think they could do a lot more and be of much more value. BEPSI, like the agency itself above it, they are called upon to do two conflicting things: promote and regulate. And if we learned anything from EB5, we learned that that's not necessarily a good idea. So I would argue that BEPSI has an important role to play. They're already in TIF world. They can do some administrative stuff, and it should. But as for the key decisions, for example, the project criteria, if the applicant meets it, if the town comes forward with a thing, I would say, look at this board as a potential place for that decision. The membership of the board was curious. It included VITA, which doesn't do housing. It included the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, which itself is conflicted because they represent towns. So they shouldn't be a member of the body. And it doesn't include the HCB. So I would make some changes there, but that's up to you guys. Yes, does that answer the question?
So I think you're also saying putting the decisions there and making them independent of BEPSI.
Yeah. Now, it was, people who are busy people. They're not looking for more work to do, but I don't think there would be that. I don't know. I don't think there'd be that many chances for them to be engaged.
That's just one more. You've spoken and others have spoken copiously about the definitions of provable. But one thing I haven't heard anyone speak to is the decision to include contiguous parcels that are not being developed from the retention aspect. Can you talk about that?
I noticed that, and it's related to something else I saw that came out of Commerce. And you can imagine they're believing that it was logical. It said, it's not just the construction or installation of new infrastructure, but the rehabilitation or renovation. Well, if there's something already there, then background growth is not invisible, as they would have us believe. The mayor said a couple of times, hey, there are parcels that haven't been developed. So there is no background growth. But if there's infrastructure on it that's being renovated or rehabilitated, then there is, arguably, we can determine if there is in fact some background. So that's part of it. Sorry, I got off track, but your other question
was whether or not it makes sense to exclude contiguous parcels that are not being developed.
Yeah, contiguous parcels. There again, you're talking about the potential for background growth. And it wasn't clear in the bill that came from Commerce whether those contiguous parcels would also be considered as sources of increment. Is the district now larger because of those contiguous parcels? I don't know. And how do you define a contiguous? How big could it be? Before you know it, you could have half a TIF district. I don't know.
Representative Kimball.
Yeah, just on that score, I think the logic is that if you couldn't have this development except for an improvement over here, whether it's a wastewater, water, or an intersection, then that development wouldn't occur, wouldn't be possible. So anyway, I think that was just the logic there about the non-contiguous parcels. And I'm curious, from your perspective, if you compare TIF to CHIP, in terms of, the ability to administer it or review it, which as an auditor would you prefer?
It is smaller, but it has some of the same technical challenges. TIF is very complicated. There are a lot of people who have you believe it's not, but it is. I mean, virtually every audit we've done of the TIF districts has found what some would consider serious problems. Not that people have bad intent, but it's complicated. Maybe they didn't have the right people in the right jobs. Maybe somebody retired and the new person didn't get trained. Just all that kind of moving parts. But it's not uncommon for us to find that somebody shorted the Ed Fund a few $100,000. The Ed Fund owes them a few $100,000. It's all over the place. Now, admittedly, a few $100,000 isn't going to make or break the state or this program. But if it's so easy to make mistakes at that level, then the program is probably too complicated.
In your sense of guardrails, when you said no limit on the Ed Fund, but with the idea of adding a penny or two, if there's an impact to limit it from that perspective, saying, or at least force a review by the legislature as to whether or not the investment.
That's my goal, because as I said, I'm the accountability guy, and if there's no way to measure, no way currently to measure performance. The original bill from the Senate said, well, 10 years out, we can look back and then that's way too late. You know, who knows how much would have been obligated from the Ed Fund in 10 years if the program is really successful. And why wouldn't it be? Developers like free money, everybody does.
And there are similar tax credit programs which are also not capped, or that the same theory might apply or approach.
The legislature has, over the last decade or so, at their own choice, and wisely so, been looking at tax expenditures systematically to say, why did we create that? And has it achieved the goal intended? I think they've gotten through most of it by now.
Further questions?
Two more quick items. I know you're starving. I'll get out of your way. I was a little surprised at what popped up in the Commerce version about 40% of the square footage could be non-housing. That struck me as odd. You know, we have people coming in 40% of the square footage for something other than housing. I don't get that. Furthermore, again, finally, back to the improvements definitions. There are some very general terms in there that are not defined clearly. And furthermore, call me crazy. I heard Dominic talking, and you know that's his perspective, but site prep. Why is that an obligation? Why is that infrastructure? Why is that an obligation of a municipality? That's the developer's job. And there was also reference to this money, the increment can be used to purchase property. From whom? For whom? Why? Developers usually put together their own parcels and then go to the town and say, here's our plan for our property. So some work needs to be done on the definition, not by me, I'm not a housing guy, but some of that stuff jumped out at me.
Last question, Representative Holt.
Thank you. Some of us are from communities that have seen extraordinary background growth that has absolutely nothing to do with development.
Yeah.
How do you disaggregate the fact that, you know, whether it's because you've been targeted by out-of-staters or because you're a great alternative to the stock market, we're seeing this sort of background growth. How do you protect the Ed Fund in that case where there's significant potential growth, but it may not be attributable to the TIF itself?
I would say look for another vehicle to accomplish your goal than TIF.
So use something.
As Representative Odie said, what if the state put together a big tranche of money for infrastructure in municipalities? Everybody wants it. Make a commitment to it. And when you make a commitment, that usually means money. Here, you know, your source of money is the one where nobody's watching, kind of. And you know, you could also, if you want to limit the hit on the Ed Fund, in addition to the things I've mentioned, you could say, well, why does it have to be 70%? What if we limit it to 50? It would be less Ed Fund money being used for these purposes. That might make both the municipality and the developer make some hard choices. Why not? There's no rule that says it has to be 70 or 80. You can do whatever you want. Because you have the power. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry it's so late, but
No.
that's not my.
Clearly.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks so much.